Lately, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Knoll from the Sacred Stones. He's a pretty popular character, and it's not hard to see why. He's one of only 2 units able to use dark magic in the game, and of the 2 of them, he's the only one that really specializes in it. This on its own is often enough to propel a unit to popularity, especially since so many players like to include one of every weapon type on their team, and Sacred Stones encourages this with the way the S ranks are distributed. But Knoll has another trick in his arsenal, because in the Sacred Stones, Dark Mages can promote to Summoner, and gain the ability to bring forth Phantoms, which are disposable soldiers you can use as fodder in a variety of strategies. Being able to use generic disposables is a very powerful tool in the right situation, and only becomes better the more you know about AI manipulation. All of these factors combined have led to Knoll having a cult following. Just look at famous YouTuber Kratos MVN, or as his friends like to call him, Knoll Lover MVN, talking about his favorite unit in all of Fire Emblem.
I proclaim that Knoll from Fire Emblem Sacred Stones is my favorite Fire Emblem unit and Fire Emblem character ever. I love him.
But I'm sorry, Kratos, I'm going to have to spend the rest of this video insulting your boy, because I am of the opinion that Knoll is pretty bad, and it's for one simple reason. Summoners are extremely strong in the right circumstances, but Sacred Stones is not the right circumstances. So for this video, I want to take a look at how Knoll, and by extension the other summoner Ewan, perform in Sacred Stones, why I don't think summoning works in this title, and some situations where summoning can actually be useful, both in and out of the Sacred Stones context. But first, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to this video's sponsor, Human Flesh! Human Flesh is a groundbreaking new diet alternative for the working man, woman, or NB. When you are under the heel of capitalism, preparing a fresh meal every day takes a lot of time and energy that you probably don't have. Not only that, but it's very expensive and it doesn't even sate the hunger. But thankfully, the alternative diet lifestyle of Human Flesh gets around all of these problems. And it doesn't cost a cent. All you have to do is forfeit your soul and kill your fellow man. Consume the flesh on their body down to the very bone, and you will sate the everlasting craving. And the best part is, after your first bite, you will continue to get new deliveries, as policemen come to investigate the mysterious disappearances that happen in your neighborhood. You can invite them in to show off clues, and then kill and eat them too. Now you may be wondering, Danny, why are you willing to team up with Human Flesh if they so clearly do unethical things like murder? And to that I would say, at least they treat their workers right, unlike some other meal plans with the same initials. So what are you waiting for? Forfeit your morality today, and make sure to use my coupon code HELLISREAL for 15% off your first order. Thank you so much, Human Flesh, for the sponsorship, and now let's get back to the video. Depending on whether you go Erica route or Ephraim route, Knoll will join you either on or directly before Chapter 15, Scorched Sands. As a level 10 shaman, he's definitely underleveled for the point that you get him, although this is far from the worst instance of underpowered training projects in the Sacred Stones. But since he's level 10, Knoll kind of presents the option to skip the training arc and instantly promote him and just make use of his promoted stats. Unfortunately, they're not particularly good, regardless of whether you go into the Druid line or the Shaman line. It doesn't help that dark magic is pretty bad in GBA, and in Sacred Stones in particular, as an extra insult, the Dark Rank S-Tome can't deal effective damage to monsters, unlike every other S-Rank in the game. I'll throw Knoll's stats up on screen, but they are pretty disappointing. Definitely not the sort of thing that you can work with an instant promotion. 11 speed and 13 magic is just not cutting it at this portion of the game. And, of course, as you would expect from a mage, Knoll is incredibly fragile, so he can't really soak up hits in order to make use of something like Nosferatu. But despite their status as meme stats, I do think his low skill and luck are the things that hurt him the most, With 0 luck, he basically needs to keep the Hoplon Guard in his inventory at all times. Otherwise, he can face low percentage crits from any enemy that can reach him. And with only 9 skill as a druid or 10 as a summoner, his accuracy is not going to be great. This is bad because you need to hit things in order to kill them, but also because if he wants to make use of Nosferatu, well, he can't really rely on actually regaining the health since you need to land your attacks to do that. I think it's safe to say that Knoll's combat is pretty close to unsalvageable. Although, if you're watching this video, you probably already knew that. Indeed, the argument for instant promoting Knoll is the utility that he gains from his promotion, specifically promoting on the summoner path. He gains access to stabs, but at E rank he can only use heal, and that's just not cutting it in chapter 15. The real appeal is the summon command. For anyone who hasn't played Sacred Stones, summoners can, well, summon phantoms to fight for you. These are flying generic axe fighters whose stats and inventory are somewhat determined by a combination of the summoner's level and RNG. However, there are 3 notable exceptions to this rule. The defense and resistance stat will always be 0, and their HP stat will always be 1. The idea is, if anything ever lands a hit on these phantoms, they die, but you can infinitely resummon more of them. And unlike the various summonables in Valentia or Tellius, these are blue units completely under the player's control, so you can do with them what you wish. Human wave tactics enabled. And I definitely understand why people like this. Heck, I like this just from a pure fun standpoint. I think summoning is one of the most fun things that you can do in the Sacred Stones. Not only that, but as a long outspoken advocate for sacrifice strategies, I think that the ability to have disposable units that you do not care about whether they will live or die enables some really powerful stuff. One of the standouts is AI manipulation. Because the Phantom's bulk is nearly 0, the enemies will almost always target them over your units, and as a result, you can trick them into attacking the Phantom in order to save someone else's life. Now, if they would kill both units, it's not guaranteed they'll go for the Phantom, but say Erica was going to get 2-rounded and there's 2 enemies, if you put a Phantom next to her, then one enemy will attack the Phantom and the other one will attack Erica, so she doesn't get 2-rounded. And if you want to get extra degenerate, you can suicide a bunch of Phantoms into bosses to break their weapons. Then, once the boss is defenseless, it's time to train your level 1 Amelia to have a general for the endgame. So, in a vacuum, I agree with the assessment that summoning is a very powerful tool. But unfortunately for Knoll, Sacred Stones is not a vacuum. Well, I guess technically it is fortunate for Knoll, because if Sacred Stones was a vacuum, he wouldn't be able to breathe and then he would die because, you know, there's no oxygen in vacuums. But regardless, my point still stands. Sacred Stones is just not a setting where there are many opportunities for summoners to succeed. And that's because this campaign mostly features waves of low-quality enemies. I find that a large number of maps in Sacred Stones devolve into having your super units line up and kill a bunch of enemies on enemy phase. And the Sacred Stones gives you no short supply of super units. The ones who immediately come to mind are Seth and Dusel, since they come for free and are basically immortal. But if given experience, training projects like Franz, Ford, and Kyle can also become super units. And by the time that Knoll joins you in Chapter 15, the campaign is close to over. Most of your squad has probably got a large amount of experience and completed their journey from 0 to hero. So while a Phantom could distract an enemy in order to prevent them from attacking one of your units, there's kind of no need for them to. Not only that, but I would argue that using a Phantom to distract the enemies is actively detrimental to your game plan. If an enemy attacks a trained up Franz or Garrick or Myrrh or any number of other projects, odds are they will not die to that enemy and they will counter and kill the enemy. In contrast, if an enemy unit attacks your Phantom, sure, none of your units die, but neither does the enemy unit, because the Phantom dies before it gets to counterattack. The Phantom's death is less permanent than Dusel's would have been, but Dusel also wasn't going to die. Now, you could make the argument that not every unit who sees a deployment slot is going to be as invincible as your Cavaliers and Wyverns, and that's true. Oftentimes, Staffers will be on the frailer end of the spectrum. But if you're deploying a frail Staffer, they don't really need to see the front line. Even combat mages like Archer and Lute can be protected with relative triviality just by positioning them behind other units. And moreover, against the correct enemy classes, these units can also hold their own. They're not going to die in a single hit like the Brittle Phantoms will, and they will counterattack with big magic. While the ability to use Phantoms to distract enemies is strong on paper, we don't play Fire Emblem on paper. We play it on Game Boy Advance. Definitely Game Boy Advance. Our legally acquired Game Boy Advances that we all have, and we all have capture cards for, that's where we play Fire Emblem. The other popular use for Phantoms is to break bosses' weapons. And, yeah, this is something you can do, but it is pretty obviously a cheese tactic, and not only that, it's super unnecessary. While the bosses are stronger than standard enemies, and they do actually have a chance of killing some of your units, you have the tools to deal with them without needing to use a summon for 50 turns to break their hand axe. I'm not the sort of person who values turn count, but it is pretty obviously an exploit if you just kill Phantoms over and over and over to disarm the boss. You can do it if you want, and it is very funny, but come on. Outside of absurd challenge run situations, just use Garm. Moreover, a lot of the late game bosses are on maps that feature some sort of time-sensitive element, such as River of Regrets swarming you with reinforcements that are scary, or Last Hope, where you literally have a time crunch to kill Reeve. In maps like this, you kind of can't afford to take the 50 turns to break the boss's weapon. In fact, from the time that you get Knoll to the time that the game ends, there's only 3 bosses I can think of where this isn't the case, and that is the 2 in Scorched Sand and Orson in the following chapter. So even aside from its meme status, it's just not something you can frequently do. But I have been mean to Knoll for basically this entire video, so I'm going to change my tune and point out the one area in which I think summoning actually is useful within the Sacred Stones, and that is on the Gorgon Egg map. You see, the way that summoning works is Knoll uses his action to summon a Phantom, but he can do that after moving. So if Knoll moves his full movement, summons a Phantom, and then the Phantom moves its full movement, which is flying, mind you, then Knoll has effectively doubled his attack range, and as a result, he can reach farther than anyone using a non-Seize weapon in a single turn. The Gorgon Egg map involves a bunch of eggs on timers that you want to kill before they can hatch. And because these eggs are scattered throughout all the different corners of the map, it becomes a very movement-oriented map, but crucially one that doesn't involve rescue dropping. Instead, you want to move your combat units all over the place. And because the thresholds to kill the eggs are so low, even the weakest Phantoms can kill eggs. Thusly, Knoll's Phantoms are actually a really good way of breaking some of the faraway eggs. Even if the Phantom dies after its mission to destroy the egg, you can just summon another one. And even better, that's probably the desired outcome, because you can send the new Phantom in a completely different direction. Because of this, in my opinion, Knoll is probably the best egg breaker in the cast. Yes, that does sound like the sort of award that you would give at a 2nd grade summer camp, but I mean, it's something he's got going for him. It's more than Amelia. It should be worth noting that technically speaking, Ewan can also become a summoner, although he takes more effort than Knoll. If you decided to train him up, his combat stats are going to be better than Knoll's, so he makes a decent Mage Knight, which is probably better than Summoner for him, for the various reasons I laid out. But if all you care about is breaking the eggs, then go ahead and train up Ewan. The 2 of them together can make the biggest omelet in the world. Now, while Sacred Stones isn't a great environment for summoners, there are plenty of other games in the series, and some of them are even good. For summoners, I mean, of course, good for summoners. In fact, Path of Radiance, the next game in the series, was developed alongside Sacred Stones, and it stole a little bit of FE8's homework, because the character Tanith has the ability Reinforce, which is kind of like a play on summoning. She will reinforce with 3 Pegasus Knights, and she can do this 2 times per map. It's not infinite like the summons are, and they're not directly player controlled, although you can influence their movement with orders. In hard mode of Path of Radiance, I generally don't think this is particularly strong for basically the same reasons that I don't like summoning in Sacred Stones, but in Maniac mode, it's probably Tanith's best quality. Part of this is because Maniac mode features stronger enemies, including a lot of Siege Tomes and Status Staves, and it's nice to have Lightning Rods for those. But the bigger thing is that the summons are just really strong in Maniac mode. The yellow units scale up with Maniac mode bonuses, much like red units do. Blue units and green units don't get to benefit from this, so I assume that this is a glitch similar to hard mode bonuses in FE6, but it's possible that this was an intended mechanic, I don't know. I personally don't think anyone fucking playtested FE9 Maniac mode, so my money's on glitch. Still, I would argue that even if they hadn't gotten these stat buffs, Tanith summons would still be useful in FE9's Maniac mode, just to bait out strong enemies or take Status Staves and Siege Tomes to the Dome. Another game that gives you summons with actual stats is Fire Emblem Engage, but unlike Path of Radiance, you do get to directly control these summons, and so you can have them accomplish tasks for you or send them to specific squares if you want them to bait out enemies. Now, I've only done one playthrough with Emblem Veronica, so I don't know the specifics of how you get specific summons, but I'm pretty sure it is heavily, if not entirely, based on RNG, which soldiers you will summon. Sometimes you get a powerful lord from a previous game, and other times you get just generic unpromoted soldier. I'm not a huge fan of this aspect of the summoning, but I mean, I guess they had to reference gacha games somehow. Still, having direct control over them is nice. One of the biggest frustrations that I have with Tanith summons is as yellow units, you can't directly control them. You can tell them to target a specific square on the map, but if you do that, they'll never attack. If you want them to attack, you have to let them move on their own, and the AI is not great in these games. Other than that, Veronica's summons are basically useful for the same reasons as Tanith's. While Engage doesn't feature Siege Tomes and Status Staves, it does feature a large number of threatening enemies, and so just having disposables is nice. And hey, if you get lucky in your gacha pulls, you could end up with a unit who basically imitates the Maniac mode stat glitch. In a similar vein, I'm actually a pretty big fan of the summoning spell in FE2 and FE15, Evoke. The type of units that you summon with Evoke depends on which character uses them, but they are always green units, meaning that they are completely out of your control. As a result, there's not a ton you can do in terms of baiting specific enemies or AI manipulation, but the summons are still useful for luring enemies out of defensive positions. Because enemies in SOV are often on advantageous grounds compared to you, it's good to have some disposables that you can throw away and then allow your blue units to take the advantageous position. The lack of direct control over the green units makes things a little bit harder since you can't predict their movements accurately, but it's still a nice tool in your arsenal. I can't really say the same for summoning in Tearing Saga. It works very similarly to Gaiden and Echoes, but since enemies in TRS are generally weaker than your units, and they don't typically have super defensible positions, it doesn't come in handy too often. There are a few maps with a large number of ballisticians where the summoned units can be useful for luring their shots, similar to the yellow units in FE9, but other than that, I'm just not a huge fan of summoning in TRS. But Tearing Saga is basically a ROM hack on the PlayStation, so that lets me transition into ROM hacks, where summoning is routinely useful if you're given access to it. While there are some games that have green summons, such as Vision Quest or Call of the Armor, In general, I don't really like that approach. Instead, I'm a huge fan of when the mechanics of Sacred Stone summoning are transported into a game with actually threatening enemies. There are doubtless a lot of high offense, low defense focused hacks, but the two that come to mind for me are Code of the Burger King and Blessed Hearts, both of which include a summoner in the main cast. Technically, TMGC also has a summoner, but I've never actually gotten the summon event with him, so I don't know if it works identically to Sacred Stones. But in both Burger King and Blart, your units are typically not tanky enough to stand up to a plethora of attacks, and as a result, having a summon able to Lightning Rod one away is very useful if you want to be doing combat on enemy phase. It's the same utility that would be offered by Sacred Stone summons, but now there's actual applications for it. And as a result, it ends up being one of the strongest pieces of utility in the game. So despite this being a video about summoning kinda sucking in Sacred Stones, I do think that Sacred Stones' approach to summoning is probably the best one we've gotten. The fact that you have direct control over them and that their defenses are so low means that you can reliably use them as sacrifices, which I do truly think is the most powerful part of summoners, their disposability. So Knoll is a good unit, he's just unlucky. He's stuck in a game that isn't good for him. Although, I guess that is kind of ironically in character for him. That 0 luck stat affects more than just his gameplay performance. It's what landed him in Sacred Stones to begin with. If Knoll was in a game like FE6 or Radiant Dawn, he would be an all-star. But as it stands, the toolset he offers just is not very good. Thanks for watching the video. Today's comment code word is vegan. So if you made it to the end of the video, make sure you include the word vegan in your comment so I know you made it to the end. And while you're down there, if you liked the video, go ahead and click like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Special thank you to Kratos for letting me use the clip from his stream, despite the fact that it's going into a video talking trash about his favorite unit. And of course, as always, also thank you to my patrons, whose numbers include Michael Kraus, Len, Gameboo, Karosa, Fyrant, Smaz Ruby, Reflect, Maren McLean, Calamity Callie, Adele, Thaythom, Andu, Axel Rosenberg, Jamie Collins, Mean Jojo, Thick Molder, Arvis, Bell Wenska, Dysike, Ginger, Root Beer Pants, Queen Eliza, Tailored Muffin, George Granville the 7th PM, SUP, Caius Cole, Gabe the Green, Control Aegis, Joanna the Wrenchwitch, Roman Kormansik, Nick Nack Hammersmack, and especially my Jagans, Autumn Kelsey, and Julia Kyoto. If you are interested in getting your name added to this list, there is a link to my Patreon below. You get videos like this about a week early, and you also can vote in polls to influence my channel. Plus cat pics, and like, that's the real selling point. You know, fuck Fire Emblem. All you really want in life is cat pics.